Meanwhile, a political storm here, another sort of storm here. The president blasting his attorney general yet again, repeated charges against what he's doing that's hurting lawmakers on his side, to the Federalist senior editor, Mollie Hemingway. Update me on the president's beef with Sessions on this.
Well, there are so many problems that President Trump has with Sessions, and some of them are quite legitimate. Recently, though, he tweeted that he was opposed that the Department of Justice had indicted 2 sitting congressmen so soon before an election, and that these were safe seats that Republicans held, and so it was sort of politically inappropriate to go after them at this time. It is true that the Department of Justice generally used to try to avoid indicting people right before elections. That's something that's kind of gone away in recent years, but this is ridiculous that you would say that one of the reasons why you shouldn't go after them is because they were in safe districts for your political party. That's just as bad as when the Department of Justice was politicized under President Obama, when he would say that Eric Holder was his wingman, or when he weighed in on the Clinton investigation while she was still being investigated. So just generally a lot of blame to go around here.
Be that as it may, obviously the president isn't firing him, and it's pretty clear that Jeff Sessions isn't offering to quit. Maybe other stuff is going behind the scenes that I'm not seeing, but this is weird. The whole thing is weird.
Well, what's really weird is that our Attorney General was sidelined based on a sort of a crazy theory of Russia collusion. And he recused himself from anything overseeing either the Clinton campaign or the Trump campaign, which turns out to be 2 of the areas where we really could use some leadership and political accountability. And so I think Jeff Sessions was tremendously naive, and it's a disservice to the American people and to the president they elected that he has sidelined himself and given authority to someone who's also implicated in both of these things. Remember that Rod Rosenstein, who's for all intents and purposes the acting attorney general in many of these things, was the guy who recommended firing James Comey. He also signed off on one of those FISA applications that's riddled with information that should not have gone before the secret court that determines whether you can spy on an American citizen. We really do have a problem with the Department of Justice not being credible right now, or seeming to have political bias in how it handles investigations that are politically sensitive. And it would be really good to have some accountability, which we just don't have. And they're avoiding responding to Congress as Congress tries to get information about some of the ways that these investigations were handled. And so it really is a mess, and it's a mess in part because Jeff Sessions recused himself when he really was needed.
Well, it was a big sin and maybe a regretful error, but it is what it is, and it happened a long time ago. You could argue the point if the president was so flummoxed and angry about this, he could and should maybe have dumped him then, but he didn't. So I've heard there's different machinations here, that there's a difference between firing Sessions and forcing him to resign, or that he takes the bait, embarrassing bait, whatever you want to call it, and quits, because that could afford the president a chance for an interim appointment. Can you explain that process, why there is a difference?
Basically, there's just debate about whether you can make a temporary appointment, that you can fill a vacancy if the person is fired. The language of the statute says something about someone dying or resigning or unable to fulfill his duties, but it doesn't refer to firing. So there's just some debate about whether you could. I think actually you probably could replace him. And the thing is that despite the Senate having some division about what they think about Sessions staying or not staying, in general, the Senate likes to hold confirmation hearings, as we've seen today. They're quite dramatic and fun for them. And they like to have that time where they can show some authority over these people who will head up executive branches. So I think that should President Trump decide to fire Sessions, I think that he would have every right to pick up a replacement, and the Senate should hold hearings on that.
But it seems that would be after the midterms. The president all but said, I think he'd hang on to him through them, right?
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. There's just too much going on right now anyway, and it wouldn't be handled appropriately. And also, getting rid of Sessions right now, I said that Rod Rosenstein was essentially acting attorney general. Well, he would officially be acting attorney general during that time until you have a replacement filled. And there are a few different means that you can get a replacement. And a temporary replacement is something that you can just take anyone who was Senate confirmed and presidentially appointed, but they only last for 210 days or thereabouts. So there will have to be something done to figure out how to get control over the Justice Department. And it really should be under political control. This is not, you don't want law enforcement agencies being independent or not having any accountability.
Did the president, when all is said and done, actually plant the seeds for a lot of this by firing James Comey? That was not a Sessions move. That was his move.
Firing James Comey happened after many months of the Department of Justice playing games on Russia. So the idea that he should have kept him in position when he was, you know, having those meetings about the dossier, leaking about the dossier to media outlets, privately assuring Donald Trump that he wasn't under investigation, but publicly intimating that he should be. This was a guy who was just shady. And I think people on both sides of the aisle can see that he was not someone who had earned the respect that you should have
no,
to
I'm not
lead
even
the
saying
FBI.
it was good or bad or right or wrong, but that was the next, you know, volcanic act that sort of brought us to where we are,
But again,
justified or not.
It's an important norm that we believe the president has the right to hire or fire whomever he wants. That is an important norm. And it's the removal of that norm, acting like Donald Trump is the one president in the history of the country who doesn't have that right. That is more dangerous to me than him actually overseeing the executive branch and determining who should be in charge.
Well, it could be the timing of that right, too, right?
Well, I think maybe the big error was not firing him on day one, particularly since he already knew from that meeting about the dossier that he was dealing with someone who was a bit shady.
All right. Molly, thank you very much. The Federalist senior editor, Molly Hemingway.